All right, thank you very much. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our next Fireside chat. Um, Today we have Jacob Mooney here to talk to us about card game design. So, Jacob, if you want to give it an initial introduction for yourself.
Sure. I'm Jacob Mooney. I have wanted to be a game designer since I was in the fourth grade and I played Majora's Mask. I went to Columbia College of Chicago, graduated in 2013 with a degree in game development. My first kind of jobs in game design were doing QA for Jackbox games and Volition, uh, but mostly Jackbox games. And then I was a game designer at a company called Double X that does medical games. It's mobile games for doctors. And then I started a job working at Magic the Gathering on the casual play design team, which is like mostly focuses on like the commander format, if you know Magic the Gathering. And then I quit Magic the Gathering in like end of June 2023. And while I look for new work, I have a company with a friend of mine, and we make tabletop role playing games and uh, board games.
Awesome. That is really interesting. So I mean, you kind of mentioned it already, like in your when you first popped in, but it sounds like you've been on that Balafra wave.
I've been playing a lot of Balatro. I just started to get a deck in like blue stakes. I think whichever one is after green, and I spend way too much time on Balatro.
That is like the two things. That is like the one thing I hear from every game developer who is playing that game.
Too much time on Balatro. Game feels like it shouldn't be as good as it is, but it's extremely good.
So, have you always been into card games, like before you started like working on them professionally?
So I have known about Magic the Gathering, and I have known how to play Magic the Gathering uh, from an early age, but I haven't really been into card games really that much until I graduated from college, and a lot of my friends picked up Magic the Gathering at the same time. We all started playing Magic the Gathering, and I kind of fell into the game. There's parts of Magic the Gathering that I really, really love. I love how much rule breaking there is in Magic the Gathering. I love copying spells. There's like an early card that I got that means a lot to me that like copy spells, and it was the very first time that I saw those words on a magic card, and I was like, what the hell does copying a spell mean? And somebody explained it to me. I was like, that's amazing, that's insane. And then that's when I was kind of like hooked into the game. And so I would say like from around 2013, which was like a lot of people play Magic then go away and then like have a renaissance. That was like my Magic the Gathering renaissance, and from there I've been pretty into Magic the Gathering. Not really other card games, mostly just Magic though.
That's interesting because a lot of times when someone's like a really big fan of a genre, it's like almost like a childhood, like it's like something that they carried since childhood. It's interesting that you sort of started much like later in your life.
Yeah. I was taught how to play when I was like 11 ish by like my cousin. And I always thought that the game was cool, but like I never really played Magic until 2013.
Okay. So, since we're getting into you working on like Wizards of the Coast and Magic, is there something particular about designing card games that you think really appeals to you in a way that maybe working on another genre doesn't?
In a way that working in another genre doesn't. I would say like not quite in a way that like another genre can't, but card games have this sort of wild amount of modularity, right? That's the entire point, is that you're dealing with these little teeny tiny game elements that like when you smush them together, they make like a big game. And you take the cards that you smush together and you go and play against somebody else who smushed a bunch of other cards together, and you have so much variance. I think that maybe the variance there is something that other genres can't really do. Everything else other genres can do, but they have to do it in a different way. When you play a card game, there's an amount of self-expression that you can't really get unless you're in a game whose entire deal is self-expression, like Minecraft or something like that. And when you play a card game, every single game piece gets to talk to the player and tell the player, hey, this rule is different now, or hey, this doesn't work the same way anymore, or something like that. So you have um, kind of an exploration of like experimenting with cards and seeing how effects combine. Those are all things that happen in every genre, but card games get to do them. Card games get to cheat because you get to just make a card that says the game works differently as long as this card is in play, and that's very exciting.
Interesting. Yeah, like I was actually just gonna start as like a guess of like the player expression because it's like there's just so much freedom in like what you choose to build in your deck.
Yes, yeah. You can
So
really do anything in Magic the Gathering, especially since it's just existed for like 30 years. There's a card that can do almost anything.
yeah, actually, speaking of how long, so I had a question since from you have worked on it. Do you feel like one thing, like if I had to guess from how long it is like I would expect there to be like a million duplicate cards. Like, how do you all like when working on it keep track of like what you've already done and try to like expand on that?
This is but my answer to this question is going to sound like kind of fake. Um, there is not a there is no there's no like special process that keeps us from making duplicate cards. The secret is like we live in the age of the internet and we can look up on different card like databases that you know we don't run, what cards exist and if something has been done before. um, but that only is part of the answer, right? Because like what if you don't look it up, or what if you look it up in a way that like misses a card? And here I'll just say that like there are something that comes with making a game that's been around for so long is that like a lot of the people who work in the game grew up playing the game, and they just have steel trap like memories of like what cards said what. There are people in the building who can quote for you verbatim the entire text of a card from like fifth edition if you just tell them the card's name. um, the weird thing there is that different people have like a different sort of like mind vault. Like your mind, like you might have a vault that starts here and ends here or something like that. um uh and everybody, as soon as you start working in the building, you just forget what cards happened when, because they had different names when you were working on them. When you finished working on them was like a year and a half ago, so when they finally come out, your brain kind of gets like deja vu. But yeah, there's a small number. Short version is there's a small number of developers in the building who like have an encyclopedic knowledge of the history of Magic.
Okay, so it is a lot of just sort of relying on like the experience and like domain knowledge of like some of the like long
Yeah,
time staff.
it helps that one of the things that Magic has to do with every product is do new things. And so for a lot of main set releases, they are making a new mechanic. So like what's the one that just came out? Outlaws of Thunder Junction uses mounts and uses a new mechanic called plot. And you know that if you make a card that uses uh, mounts or plot, you're making a card that's never happened before. Even if it's very similar to a card that already exists, it's meaningfully different.
Gotcha. How often are those releases?
Oh God. One of the things, so Magic the Gathering has six, I believe, what are called tentpole releases every year. Those are the big releases, and then there are smaller things like Secret Lairs and other special releases that happen um, in and around the tentpole releases. So like six major releases, four of which, around four of which are like sets that are getting made for standard, which is like the main line releases of Magic the Gathering, if you want to think about it that way. Some releases are like Universes Beyond, which is when Magic kind of like dips its toe into a completely different intellectual property. Like they made an entire draftable set, a full size Magic set for Lord of the Rings, and other special releases like one that's coming out in just a short amount of time is Modern Horizons 3, which is like a trumped up, super powered Magic set for an older format, not the normal standard format. So between all of those, 6 big releases a year. So a lot of cards, thousands of cards a year.
That is daunting
Insane.
and
It is
impressive.
it is
Yeah,
insane. Yeah.
and even more so the fact that people are keeping all of that like in
Yeah.
their heads.
in the team that I worked on, Casual Play Design, our job was to take every single one of those cards and look at it from the perspective of Commander, which is currently Magic's most popular format, depending on how you look at it, and think about, is this healthy for Commander? We could ignore a lot of the common cards and most of the uncommon cards, but we had to look at like every rare and every mythic rare, and even some, for some sets the uncommons were relevant, um, because some cards are just powerful in sneaky ways.
Interesting. So actually dipping into Commander, um, do you think there's something special about it? Because about its rule set or like the cards it allows or doesn't allow that actually like led to it being the most popular format?
I think that there are a lot of factors that will factor into why Commander was a popular format. I think that for anybody who doesn't know, Commander is not a format that like Wizards of the Coast like came up with. Commander is a format that um, a prominent Magic the Gathering judge, Sheldon Memory, who sadly passed away in the last year, came up with and then like shared with their community, and they were, somebody who was very active in their community, and it grew from there. So one of the things that it has going with it is that, it's something that your friends get you into, and it was kind of like spread virally. Another thing that it has going for it is you get to take a card that you love and put it in the command zone. Any legendary creature can be your commander, and that's the card that you know that you're going to play with that game. And if it does splashy cool things, you know that you're going to get to do splashy cool things that you love to do when you play that deck. Um, Another really important part of the format is that like every single card in your deck, with some exceptions, has to be different. You can't have like 2 or 3 of a certain card. It has to be all different. So you have a format that is focused on expression and game variance and not knowing what's going to happen. And the last thing about it is that it's a multiplayer format. So you're always playing with 3 of your best friends who all also have their decks that, say something meaningful about who they are as a person. I play, my favorite commander is Melik, is it Paragon, which is nowadays not that great of a commander, but I love copying spells, and it lets me cast cards off the top of my library, so I don't even have them in my hand when I'm casting them, and I'm always surprised. And that's me. That's like me expressing something that's really core to like my personality. So you have a lot of self-expression, and it's a multiplayer format, and you're just kind of like hanging out with your friends. You're hanging out with your buddies, and um, you know, kind of kind of like an excuse to spend 2 hours chatting and talking with your friends. It's kind of like a hangout engine combined with a game type, and that's what makes it so popular, I think.
Ooh, that is very interesting. So let's say Wizards contacts you and like, yo, Jacob, buddy, we need you back. There's some other game format that we're trying to like, we really want to push, and we're hoping that it can take off and be as big as Commander. You can choose whichever one you want. You can make whatever changes you want. We really want some other one to like blow up. Which one are you picking, and what changes would you make?
I'm picking draft. Um, for anybody who doesn't know, booster draft is a format of Magic where you sit down with 8 people, and everybody has 3 packs of Magic cards. unopened. Nobody knows what's in them. You open the pack, you look at the cards, you take one card, you put it down, you pass it to your neighbor, and then you go until there aren't any more cards left. And you do that with the second round of packs and then the third round of packs. And at the end of it, you've got a bunch of cards that you haven't seen before, and you have to make a deck from them, and then you play matches against everybody. Um, Draft is a lot of people's favorite format, but it's daunting. It's really hard to just jump into as a new player because you're like, whoa, I have to read all of these cards that I've never seen before. Like, if you've been playing Magic like 10 years, you're like, yeah, this is a riff off of that. Yeah, I know this with this. And then I kind of get what these colors do generally, and you don't have to. It's a lot easier. But when you're new, you're just like, I'm overwhelmed. And how many lands should I have? And did I screw myself up even before the game started by like drafting bad cards? So I'd pick draft and I would try to make it new player friendly. And I was thinking about this. I think that you could do a combination of like, on one side, you have Magic the Gathering draft. And on the other hand, you have like Pandemic Legacy or like just the idea of legacy games where you sell a preset box of Magic cards. It's not randomized, and all of the packs have like numbers on them. And when you draft with four people, so you don't need to find seven friends, you just need to find three friends. And then you draft, and then you play games, and then you finish the draft. And then if you want to play again, you put all the cards back in the packs that they started with, and the order can change a little bit, but like generally speaking, you know that when you know what cards are in pack number four, but you don't know where pack number four is going to end up being opened in the draft. So you can play it again, and if you're new, you can be like, oh, well, I was overwhelmed this time, but next time I'll know that you know this card is in this pack or this card shows up at the end of the draft or whatever, and I can draft again and start building like the skills of drafting and start like getting more comfortable with drafting. I think that would be really valuable. In the meantime, you've got like a way to hang out with your friends, which I think is like the most important thing to provide if you want a format to be like accepted. You have a way to bridge the gap for new players from just not having a Magic card collection to like understanding how to draft, which is the best way to build your Magic card collection. Like when you draft, you pay money to get an experience and add all those cards to your collection, which is great. So this would be a format that like a if I have three friends that know how to draft, they can kind of teach me. B, even if I screw up, I know that I have this that lives at my house and I can just run it again when we have a free 2 hours, and I'll do better next time guaranteed because I've seen these cards before. And then three, when I get tired of this product, I can just go into either of the two like most popular other formats, most valuable other formats to me as a consumer, draft or commander.
Interesting. Okay, so you would focus on trying to like broaden this accessibility so that like initial player experience isn't so like daunting.
Yeah, because how cool would it be to be like, I don't know at all how to play Magic, but like most people who don't know how to play Magic, I've got friends who do. And it's like, I can't really play that much with them without just like taking their decks. They have to give me a deck, and that feels weird. But if I buy this, I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to worry about sharing anybody else's cards. I can just instantly have this box. My friends like coming over to my place and playing this experience with me, and now I know how to draft. Like that'd be great.
Interesting. I like that. So what
I
you
made
were
it.
just
I made it sound easy, but it would be very difficult. Like for figuring out how to make a four-player draft feel like an eight-player draft is like really hard. People have tried to do it. It doesn't quite work. So forgiving me for that, but like I'm cheating a little bit.
that's fine. So, One other thing I was curious about. So, like, do you have any sort of like golden rules or like a sort of guiding compass when you're sort of trying to decide if a car is fair for Commander or for like any rule set?
Yeah. When we so casual play design has uh sort of a rubric, or like sort of like a set of like heuristics that we look at, a set of rules that we look at when we're trying to decide if a card is. I think I'll like we try to identify if cards are like bad or unhealthy, and what we look for are first cards that are going to be like ubiquitous, cards that are like going to go in every deck, and you'll feel like an idiot if you don't have it in your deck. So that's one less hard slot spent on self-expression, and you also feel like you have to go out and buy that card for every deck that you want to build. So we want to avoid cards that are going to be so useful in so many different situations that it just feels like you have to run it. We want to avoid cards that have unhealthy or unfun play patterns. Like if what this card is doing is just shutting down the other three opponents and it's doing that too effectively, we want to avoid that. If what this card is doing is so powerful it's the only thing you want to be doing every turn for the rest of the game, that's really repetitive and boring, and we want to avoid that. Um, we want to avoid cards that just like monopolize time. Um, the biggest like we have to print them every so often, but like the biggest like detractor of this are like cards that let you take an additional turn. It's like the definition of monopolizing the game's time. Commander, it's a 4-player format. When you take an extra turn, that's more time that 3 people have to just stare at you and go, okay, what are you doing now? So we don't want anybody to be just like taking up all of the game clock, right?
Yeah.
um and we don't want a card that totally warps the game around it. Like, oh crap, John just played that card. Now the entire rest of the game screeches to a halt as we all try desperately to get rid of that card. We don't, sometimes that's okay. Generally speaking, we don't want that to happen. Or if it does happen, we don't want it to happen too early in the game because that's not fun. Or like I'm developing my resources, you played this like enormous like threat that's going to just slowly give you a huge advantage later. I have to deal with it or I just lose, or everybody is just worried about getting rid of this one card, and it's bad because it makes the rest of the game irrelevant, right? Because now I'm not
Yeah.
worried about all the other cards that I'm doing. I'm not worried about all the other like cool things that my friends are doing. I'm just worried about this one thing. um and we want to have cards that are aspirational and leave opponents with like opportunities to fight back. So if a card has a dream, it's aspirational. If a card just kind of like gets in, does its thing, and then like goes away, or like gets in, does the thing when it enters the battlefield, and just kind of just becomes like a 3-2 for the rest of the game. Those cards are fine, but it's a little bit better if they have a dream that they're trying to live up to. And then the thing about leaving people ways to fight them back, it's like, all right, this person is trying to go for like their win condition, or they're trying to like use this really powerful creature. Are there like definite windows of opportunity that I have to like kill that creature or remove that artifact that's going to have a huge impact on the game before it does its thing? If there isn't, there's like no counterplay, and it's really unengaging. So healthy play patterns, doesn't warp the game around it, feels healthy to engage with and is engaging to deal with, and like is aspirational, has a dream that it's trying to live up to. Those are like all the good signposts of a card, while at the same time hopefully doing things like selling the creative that it's trying to like fulfill. Like, oh, this is representing this character in Magic's history. It should feel like that character. And then like at the end of the day, it should also hopefully be like not too complex. I'm really
Yeah.
guilty of making really complicated cards. I feel really good when I have a card that like gets my brain going the way a complicated card does, but its text is actually really simple. I feel really good when I do that. I don't always do that, but that's true for a lot of designers. Sometimes you make a card that's really sweet, like Saruman of Many Colors. Let me see. I'm going to paste this image into the chat.
Oh man, I can't wait.
Saruman of Many Colors. Just looking at this card, you're like, wow, that's a lot of words. Wow. It's got this one ability that says ward, you have to discard a certain type of card. And then it has one other ability, and it is a full paragraph. I'm not going to read it. I've left it in chat. But what this essentially does is when you cast your second spell each turn, all of your opponents take 2 cards and put them into their discard pile from the top of their deck, and then you can, like, potentially, depending on how big the thing that you cast is and how big the things in their graveyard are, cast one of the cards from their graveyard, including one of the ones that was just put there. But because of some things with Magic rules, and also because of us trying to make the ability a little bit better, we ended up with this, like, really hard to understand enormous block of text. And I think very few people play this card because they just look at it and go, I read this once, I read this twice, I still don't know what it does. I'm gonna put it away. Which is really sad because it's a sweet card. But yeah,
Yo, he looks thick.
I feel like it's every time like a card gets made and it went through casual play design and it comes out and it's got like phenomenal art, and then like people are like, I don't really want to play it. I feel so bad because I feel like, what could I have done to save it?
Yeah. I feel like I would definitely be the person to like build a deck based off, yo, this dude looks cool. And then like, does this deck have any synergy? I'll figure that out later.
I encourage anybody who wants to just play Commander with Saruman of Many Colors. It just means cast 2 spells a turn, and then you get to cast something from their graveyard, including what was just milled. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about figuring out what all that text does.
It's really interesting about your philosophy because it almost seems like you want to push every card to sort of have a niche of its own. And like, there are decks that it works with. There are decks that it's like, yo, no, this does not work in this deck. There's cards that it synergizes with. There's cards where it's like, yeah, no, like these two things don't work together.
We like at the end of the day, a Magic card designer's job is to make players want to buy more Magic cards. But there is like a weird like push and pull there. When we make a commander, because of how commander works, you can only put cards in the deck that are within the colors that appear on the commander. So if you make a commander that's just one color, you can't put a lot of cards in that deck, but it goes into a lot of decks. When you make a commander that's 3 colors, many more cards can go into that deck, but it can go into very few other decks, right? So when you're making legendary creatures that could be commanders, it's like a weird push and pull of like, do I want this to be a card that like spawns a bunch of new decks, or do I want this to be a card that goes into a bunch of new decks? The latter is more desirable than the former, but the former is sweeter in a lot of ways. You can just make like crazy new abilities, and a bunch of people might want to go and build whole new decks around that card.
Interesting. I like that.
And the same thing is true for like non legendary creatures, non commanders. It's like, I've got this sweet spell that doubles all of your rogue creature spells. Do I want that to be a mono black card, a blue black card, a blue black green card? Like every color that you add makes it less desirable because it can go in fewer decks, right?
Right. Interesting. I like that. So for someone who, like, let's just say they've worked on other games and they're interested in trying to like get into card games or like get into building a card game. Are there any sort of like good like references or study guides that you say like look at how this game handles balance or handles like its card design?
Yeah. This is hard for me because this is something that I struggle with. Like a lot of people at Wizards of the Coast have like built their own cube. A cube is a big box of cards that like represents an entire draftable set. I've never done that. I've never built an entire draftable set just by myself, but I've been in a lot of meetings where we were working on a card file for a draftable set. And, you know, one thing that I encourage people to do is build cubes of magic and then draft those and see what happens when you have a different number of commons and uncommons, or like see how a two color draft archetype like comes together when you're building it. There's tons of cubes that people have published online that you can pull from. Um, that really is like figuring out the bones of what a magic set needs to be before worrying about what the actual words on the cards are going to be. In a lot of ways, like you need to know the bones first. So that's kind of a cop out because I just said play magic, but outside of magic, outside of magic, in terms of like card design and like sort of design principles that would be like cross like transferable. Um, Slay the Spire and Balatro are two really good examples. They are both card games and they are both roguelikes. And when you have a roguelike, you need to have a variety of ways to progress through the game. You need to have different archetypes of how you want to build your character or your deck or whatever it is that you're manipulating. And that means that those archetypes need to feel more or less balanced between each other. The oh god, I forget the names of the characters in Slay the Spire, but like, I think it's like the Silent and the Bulwark or the Ironclad. Those characters represent two different strategies. One's like sneaky and uses knives and poison and stealth. The other one's like a big burly bruiser and armor, and their decks play really differently because it's a well built game. But their decks also don't feel like, why would I ever play the Whisper or the Silent or whatever it's called when I can play the heavy melee bruiser guy? That doesn't happen because the ways that those two characters play both feel strong. And when you're building one path for one of those characters, you encounter different types of cards. Like, oh, this card's for this strategy. I understand that now. Oh, and this card's for this strategy. I understand that now. They don't go in the same deck. They go in different decks. But which deck is stronger? Ideally, neither of them. So roguelikes are really good to look at because they have to do a lot of the things that Magic the Gathering has to do. They got to present you with cards. They got to feel balanced, and they have to have some element of like self-expression. Where like, oh, I like doing a poison thing because I like being sneaky. That's part of it. Um, and then also weirdly, I think that just roguelikes in general, even the ones that aren't based off of cards, they have to do the same thing. So Hades is also a good thing to look at, I think, if you want to understand like card design. Weirdly, that's a weird thing to say, but I believe it.
No, I see where you're going there because essentially is that like stacking abilities in that sort of like random pull and to build something that like lends to a sort of I guess cohesive unit is the best word is like it's still a way to understand how to build like a good card deck.
Yeah, the same reasons, the same things that make like uh the same systems design principles are kind of at play where you're like, put it another way, anytime that you have to balance two strategies against one another, you're kind of doing card game design, right? Because the big issue with card games is like, why don't I just put all of the strongest cards into the same deck, right? Magic solves it with the colors of mana, um, uh, Hearthstone solves it with classes. Um, how does Marvel Snap solve it? Marvel Snap solves it, but just the cards just don't go together. They're just not strong unless you're building towards a certain strategy, etc. You have to find a way to make it so that players don't want to put all of those strategies together. And any game that needs to balance different strategies is going to run into like similar kinds of like systems design.
Interesting. I am definitely going to keep that in mind. And then I guess sort of just because I know like working on like card games is a big thing for you. Do you think there's any like unexplored territory with building card games that maybe you'd like to like try building as a future project, or you'd like to see other people try doing?
Uh, yeah. So I want card game. I want the. I want card games to keep getting better, which means that I want card games to uh, less and less do things that I specifically hate. So this is going to be a very selfish answer. But like the before Marvel Snap came out, the first thing I would say is like solve when I'm playing Magic Arena and I do one good thing and my opponent leaves. Um, which Marvel Snap solves with like the cubes and like you kind of get like leaving early is kind of like part of the gameplay in Marvel Snap. So you never feel like somebody's cheating you when it happens. You feel like that's part of like the organic nature of the game. That's really cool. I really love that. That's a really great innovation. Um, I want every fast-paced multiplayer 1v1 game to like have the like snap mechanic. The second thing is that at maybe this doesn't feel so true for like competitive 1v1 Magic, but when you're playing 1v1 Commander, um, which has like a singleton deck where like every card is different, there's a lot of variance. Um, and when you're playing four-player free-for-all Commander, card games kind of feel like whoever has the most resources just wins. And the most important resource in a card game, predictably, is cards. So whenever somebody like manages to kind of get two cards worth of value with just one card, you're like, oh, they're ahead of me now. I've got to do that back or I'm going to start being behind. And when you're up in card advantage, you tend to kind of like continue to like reap more and more card advantage sometimes. So I would love it if there was a mechanic that made losing your card feel less terrible. Um, where like Magic kind of has this in certain strategies. Like, you killed my creature. Well, I actually wanted it in the graveyard for my strategy that uses like the graveyard to my advantage. But like, what if you had some kind of like underdog meter or something like that that could like literally kind of tell when somebody was like card disadvantaged and power up their cards, kind of like rubber banding in Mario Kart, which
Okay.
competitive minded people hate rubber band. Like when you're playing for like you know $800,000 or something like that, and you're at a tournament, the last thing that you want is to get blue
Blue
shelled or
shell.
something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I wouldn't want to do the rubber banding of Mario Kart. That would be bad. But like, what if I don't know. What if you got some kind of like I don't have the mechanic, but like my number one answer would be like something that makes losing your creature in Magic the Gathering feel less bad. Um, uh,
So
another
you're kind of
one,
sorry. I was going to ask. So you're sort of looking to sort of challenge the sort of like snowballing effect, where it just sort of feels like
yeah,
once I'm behind, I stay behind. You don't sort of want the extreme rubber banding where it's like I was massively behind and I'm gonna push the button, and now I'm
right.
back.
Yeah,
But
the massive rubber banding is not what I want, but like if there's like a I don't know. This creature is dead, but like their ghost hangs around and it can like possess my. It can like possess the next card that I did or something like that. Which is actually a mechanic that Magic did. Like anytime that you say something is going to be like, oh, that's actually kind of like disturbed from like our third like visit to Innistrad. Um, but uh, but yeah, like that's a really cool mechanic where like, oh dang it, you are still ahead of me, but I get a little bit of something back. Like I get a little bit like something gets unlocked for me because that creature did die. Um, and the only other mechanics that I would say are like, especially for like a four-player multiplayer like format, I want to see wild asymmetrical like powers happen. Um, in 2019, I looked this up. In 2019, a company called Gale Force 9 came out with a Dune board game, which was a re-release of like a Dune board game that came out in like 1979. It's like a
Yeah.
risk-like game where you like deploy soldiers and you try to gather spice and try to win, and it's like fighting and soldiers and etc. But the thing that I would love more games to steal from this game is that each of the factions have a totally bonkers, like totally asymmetrical, like superpower. Um, just running the list from memory. If I get these right, I might get these wrong. Caveat. Uh, they're all the different like royal families that are in Dune. So like the Harkonnens are really betrayal-y. So their special power is they get to like betray people like twice as much as anybody else. Whenever you get into a fight, there's a chance that somebody else has a betrayal card and it like totally screws you over. The Harkonnens just get like double of those. The Atreides are the player who's playing that faction. They're the only player that is allowed to take written notes. That's the entire that the rulebook just says this person is the only person who's allowed to have like a pen and paper with them when they play the game, which is like it sounds so silly, but there's like a lot of like weird things that you want to know what somebody bought like 3 turns ago, and there's no way for you to remember unless you wrote it down. So you have to be like, how much spice do I have to trade you for you to tell me that information? And like when you pay to like put troops out on the battlefield, you like depending on what you're playing, you might have to pay a player to fight them, which is just really silly. And then the Bene Gesserit have the weirdest one, which is they're like the kind of like puppet master, I'm pulling the strings faction. And at the beginning of the game, they make a prediction, and then when the game ends and somebody wins, they reveal the prediction. And if they predicted accurately who would win and on what turn, they win instead. They just win instead. It's just like what?
Bro,
Yeah. But I knew that you were going to win on turn 8, so actually give me the trophy. I would love it if we had a card game that was like bringing that kind of energy to some like Yu-Gi-Oh ass like, oh, but I I I wrote down at the beginning of the game that Shivan Dragon's my favorite creature of all time. So actually, that Shivan Dragon is my Shivan Dragon when you cast it or something like that.
Oh my god,
There's
that's
just some like
incredible.
I'm playing as this faction, so I get this like really weird out there like sideways ability that doesn't always come into play a huge amount, but when it does, it's like a big deal. Something that would be a nightmare to balance and would be totally awful for competitive play as per usual. I'm like clearly my priorities don't lie in like having healthy esports like presence, right? But
Yeah.
what can you do?
You want the chaos. You want the wildness.
I want the chaos. I want the game variance. I want every time I sit down at the table that I don't know what's going to happen. Like that's the thing that draws me to games. I think that's what draws us all to games. Like we play games because we have a question, and my question is like, what's going to happen next?
All right, I might have to hit you up for like some like ideas for mechanics because
I
the idea
love,
for like if I just guess
I
right, I just
love,
win.
yeah, like I love chatting with people about like abilities in games. I work really well in pairs because I'll say something that is stupid and too out there, and then somebody will be like, "That's not going to work." But there's a part of that idea that does work, and I go, "Oh, cool." I'm glad I could give you the kernel that is like going to become something good.
So now we are gonna open up the floor to questions. let me go through. Oh, so we got from Tim. When are you gonna make your own indie board game or card game?
Uh, I have a friend of mine and I have a company called Smiling Mythos Games, where we have not put out anything yet, but we do have a couple actually of finished games. As it turns out, when you finish a game, publishing that is like twice as hard sometimes. Oh, thank you for posting that link. So we have a party game called Reject Squad that isn't going to come out like we hope to have a Kickstarter end of this year, early next year, but we're not sure if that is going to happen. That's been done for a long time. It's you play as terrible superheroes who are desperately trying to get a job. It's kind of like Cards Against Humanity, but like more storytelling focused. You'll have like, oh, I can shoot laser beams out of my eyes, but only while I'm spinning in a circle. It's like, okay, I can see how that would be a problem. How are you going to solve this crisis? The crisis is another like two card combo, and then the judge is actually a talent scout, and you have to jump into like a job interview with them. And then uh, we have two tabletop role playing games. One is done. It's called Machine Impossible. You play as like radical leftist cyborg super spies who are desperately trying to save the city that they love. And then one that we're working on, we just started working on this one. It's called Sluggers. You play as Little League Monster Slayers. So those are like titles that we are the most invested in right now. Yeah.
I dig it. Question from Ace. Do you prefer working on physical or digital trading card games and why? Or do you prefer, just in general?
In terms of trading card games, I really like trading card games specifically. This is hard to answer. Let me back up for a second. One of the things that I learned when I worked at Magic the Gathering is that I really love working in video games. One of the reasons why I quit Magic was because even though I really had a lot of fun working there, there's something about working on a video game that just like makes me happy. So I would probably say digital trading card games. But the only trading card game that I've ever worked on is Magic. And so like I have very little experience in working in like other trading card games. But I would say digital.
Interesting. Definitely, you are going to need to stop by and let us know when that Kickstarter is out.
For sure, for sure. Um, making a board game is making a even though Reject Squad is just cards, making a board game, making a physical game is so expensive, so expensive.
It's interesting because, like, from what I remember, or at least what I
Yeah,
heard from a Kickstarter, it seems like the like physical tabletop game people were doing better than like the video game.
I I could see that. There's like I could see that, but I don't really know that like I would say that it inherently leans one way or another. Like with a digital game, you work on it, and then as soon as you're done working on it, you can kind of just deploy it. With
Right.
a physical game, like you need to have contacts that you need to have contacts with a manufacturer who runs a factory either in the United States or probably in China. You need to understand how that's going from the factory to wherever your warehouse is. You need to understand how your your game copies are going from a warehouse to the people who bought it. And if that warehouse is your house, then you need to figure out where you're going to put all these cards. If that warehouse is somebody else's warehouse, you're spending money on just taking up space every day of every month of every year that you don't sell those copies.
I see what you mean. It's that like you suddenly have a whole lot of other things you need to like learn how
You
to do in
suddenly
terms of
have
like
a whole and by the way, you need to spend $400 or something to get a test copy from the warehouse before they go into full production of it, and you need to spend $600 to $800 on game testing so that they can test the components of the game so that they know it's safe for children. There are a lot of considerations in making
Yeah.
like a physical thing.
Yeah. It's like suddenly you're learning about like shipping and logistics.
It's so much. And I have multiple friends who have done it, and I'm like, how did you do that? And like every time you ask them, hey, how did you do this? They say something that is like both helpful and not going to apply to you, which is so infuriating because you're like,
They're like, I just got lucky, and then all of my cases just fell off a truck, and I'm like, well,
I would be so, nobody has ever said that, but I would be so angry if they were like, up, I don't know what you're talking about. It was easy for me. I was like, you don't know how lucky you were.
Let's see if there's any other questions. I think that's it. All right. So usually, after this, everyone kind of hangs out in the chat and chill. I will be running back and forth between the chat channel and actually putting dinner on the stove. But thank you so much for this time, Jacob. This has been great. I'm definitely going to be hitting you up for some ideas about game mechanics, probably to throw them in a fighting game, but we'll see. But
For
yeah,
sure.
this has
Thank you
been
so
fun.
much for having me. I had a great time.
Um, yeah, thank you very much for this talk. Thank you everyone for coming, and have a good evening.
Bye bye, everybody.
All right, now we will end the stage.